Welcome everyone. Welcome to this session, Configuration Management in Drupal 8. I guess you're all familiar with at least the name. The agenda for today is first the introduction, then a little configuration management for site builders, then the comparison between Drupal 7 and Drupal 8, a closer look at CMI, and then finally CMI for developers. This presentation is based on the presentation that Andrea gave at the Drupal days in Italy. So if you've seen that one, then this one will look very familiar, although it looks different. So I'm Fabian Bircher. I'm a developer at Nuvole. Nuvole is a Drupal company and based in Brussels, Parma, and Prague. And we're the pioneers of the code-driven development, which basically meant configuration management for Drupal 6 and Drupal 7. You can find me and Nuvole on Twitter, although we don't tweet so much, but still. So before I start with the real topic, I would like to know who you are, because I have slides to cover 2 hours. No, maybe not, but it goes gradually from very easy or rather easy to more complex, and I don't want to bore most of you, and I also don't want to rush through things of most of you. So who considers themselves as a site builder? Or 1, 2, 3. Okay. And more. Okay. Let me rephrase it. So who is a hardcore developer and wants to know only the? Okay. So more developer. Okay. Then I will go more quickly through the beginning. So configuration management as an overview and practical introduction. You may know the mission statement of the Configuration Management Initiative, which is site configuration information in Drupal 8 is stored in files in your libraries directory, making it much simpler to transport configuration changes such as new content type, fields, or views from development to production. And this initial goal, with some implementation differences, was reached. So currently, if you check out Drupal 8 now, then this already works. We will come to what doesn't in a little later as well. Let's consider the reference use case, which is you want to modify configuration on a live site, but you want to keep the site live all the time. You want to develop and test the new configuration on a separate system, and you want to export this configuration in the development environment and then import it in the production environment. There is a couple of easy steps. The first step is very important, and we'll come to that later as well, is you set up your site, your production website, and then you clone the whole website the same way you would do with the Drupal 7 site. So you copy the database, you copy the full Drupal tree, and you copy all the files. And you restore the development copy. This is important because the CMI only works on the same site in different environments, but it needs to be the same site. And which site it is in basically from the installation on. Then your site operates normally. And in the development, you make some changes. Here, the site name. Then you export the configuration. There's a nice UI with a button that lets you download the whole configuration of the whole site. Then on the production environment, you upload this file that you downloaded previously. And then you can review the differences. And finally, when you're happy with it, you apply the changes and everything gets imported. That's the very basic workflow that you can have. I will come back to a slightly more advanced workflow, because this is probably not what most of you will ever use. But still, this works. There's much more to this. This is only just like the site builders part. And CMI is still under active development, even though the basic part, as I mentioned, already works. And there's still some significant changes that can still occur. So whatever I'm telling you now here may or may not change until the final release of Drupal 8.0. So what changed? What improved? And what is still missing? Configuration is defined now. So in Drupal 7, you would wonder, like, are vocabularies configuration? Are taxonomy terms configuration? In Drupal 8, it's very clear what is configuration and what is not. Basically, if it's in the configuration files, then it is. If it's not, then it's not. Simple as that. The configuration storage in Drupal 7, it's in the database. And in Drupal 8, it's in text files. Well, we'll come to that later as well. It is also in the database, but essentially database containing the text files. Drupal 8 has a uniform approach to configuration. And Drupal 7, you would have variables, database tables, ctools, features, black magic. In Drupal 8, all of it is in text files in the YAML format. In Drupal 7, for staging configuration, you would have to go through features, which was not meant for staging configuration, but it's basically only option there is. In Drupal 8, this will be natively from Drupal 8 core. Then the interface for developers. In Drupal 7, there's exportables from ctools with a bag of tricks that can sometimes be incompatible. And in Drupal 8, it's configurables, and they're PHP classes, they're entities. Small table for comparison. With Drupal 8, you can do a full site configuration export, which you couldn't do with Drupal 7, even with features, in most cases at least. With Drupal 7 and features, you can export selected configuration items. This you can also do with Drupal 8. You can track the configuration changes. And of course, the whole for Drupal 8 and including the selected parts that we had before, Drupal 7 and features. You can stage configuration, also both with features and Drupal 8 core. What you cannot do with Drupal 8 core that you can with Drupal 7 and features is package configuration in small packages, in features, hence the name. You can reuse the configuration in other projects. You cannot do that with Drupal 8 core as such. And collaborate on the project. I put a no with a little star. And I will come back to that a little later. In Drupal 7 feature, what I mean here is you can work on different features at the same time, and you will not interfere with each other if you set it up properly. In Drupal 8, you might also be able to do that, but at the and this is subject to change, I hope as well. So is CMI features done right? And I would argue that no. It's a very nice way to replace and improve one of the features use cases, which is this configuration management as such in Drupal 7. And it makes it possible to export the configuration into files, basically. So is it done wrong? And definitely also not. It's a huge step forward for the developers, and it paves the way for additional modules that could then provide the same functionality that features has also for Drupal 8. So the Drupal 8 version of features will be a much simpler module, most probably. So let's take a little closer look on what's under the hood and what you have to watch out for. The first important thing is the key value store concept. Basically, it's a key and some more complex data that can. The important part is that this data is declarative. It doesn't contain logic. It's a YAML file, and YAML doesn't contain functions. It's just a way of saying how things are, not how things are done, as opposed to the features, which is hook implementations, and hooks are functions that can contain ifs and whatever. There can be different implementations. One is, of course, a file with the key as the file name and the content as the data. But it can also be in a database where you have two columns, and one is the key, the other one is the data. Drupal core contains both of them, both of these mechanisms. One for the active and one for the staging store. And there's these two levels which are used. The active one is the one that is actually run on the site. If you configure your site in the Drupal 7 style, this is the only thing that you will encounter, and you will not use the other one. So if you just click and you set up your website like you would with a classical Drupal 7 site, then this is what you use, and you will never see CMI. CMI comes in with the staging store, where you can add the configuration and see what changed when you do that. And then you can review it and import it. The configuration is in settings.php, just like the database credentials. And when you install Drupal 8, you will see this. You will see some crazy directory name, which is for enhanced security. But they can be totally moved out of the Drupal root even. And if you follow a more advanced workflow with Git, for example, then you want to move those out of the files directory. You don't want to version the files directory, of course. So you can move them to some other safe location and just change the values here. So let's take a look at the active store and this directory, and you see that it's empty. And this is a rather recent change. And if you've heard configuration will be in files, and you look at this and you don't see any configuration, you'll maybe a bit confused. But it's because the files are in the database, like I said before, and this backend is pluggable, so you can put it back in the files if you want. But it has a couple of very important reasons for which it is that way, and it makes a lot of sense. One is the performance. It's faster to just read from the database than to read and render the files. The second is safety, from yourself, basically. Because if it's in the database, you're not so much in the temptation of just going in and edit the files because you can. This is very important because you always need to import the configuration changes. For example, if you add a new field in the configuration, then Drupal needs to go and add the database tables for this field. If you just change the active configuration, and you just say there is this field, but Drupal never went through the process of adding this field, then your site will be broken. Think of this as kind of like a part of like an update hook, sort of, that is taken care of for you. And also the security, they're less likely to be left there for reading or writing access to potentially others. So let's take a look at one of these YAML examples. This is an image style example. This from the export thing. You can see it has names and labels and all sorts of things. If you look at the exported configuration, then it's basically exactly the same with the extension. If you look at the same thing as the default configuration, you will see, this is another default configuration, but you will see it has some of the things already that get put in place. And after you install it, it looks a little bit different. And one of the biggest differences is the UUID that gets added. And the UUIDs are everywhere. And this is good because it prevents possible conflicts, since they're universally unique. But it's also bad because universally unique fundamentally clashes with the concept of reusable. So, especially with relations, and this is one of the reasons why the configuration for one site is for this site only, and this is why the site needs to be the same on the development environment and the production environment. Yeah, I jumped ahead of myself. This is one of the caveats that you need to have at the beginning the same site, and you cannot port easily the configuration from one project to the next, and this is by design. So it leaves leeway also for then a future version of features, for example, which could address this issue. One of the other things that go in the same direction is that CMI is not atomic in the sense that, for example, the permissions, all the permissions that a certain role has are saved with the role. You could not, for example, export access to certain node types together with this node feature, because they're all in this, and you cannot reuse whole files. So this is also where the new features will come in to help. If you're into features, if you're not using feature and you just set up your site and you use this for deployment, this is perfectly fine. Importing things can break things. Because if you remove a file, it's interpreted as the file, this configuration is not there anymore. And if you remove things that should not be removed, then you orphan things and you render things unusable. So always make backups, of course, or be careful what you're doing. And there is also no consistency check in the sense of that there is a check whether the YAML is valid or not, but it doesn't check whether it makes sense or not. For example, if you do this little typo and you import it, then it will be broken because this theme doesn't exist, and it lets you import it. There is also a couple of still pending things that are being discussed, and one of them is the installing from existing configuration, which would basically allow you to set up a development environment after you've already had your site running. There's an issue. I don't know if you can. I will upload the slides later to the session, and you can download them then, and you can click on the link. The idea is that you can set up you like having like an installation profile for the site that you already have, and then you import the same site. Yes.
What's the status?
Under discussion still. There is back and forth, and people say no, we don't want to do that, and others say yes, we want, and whether on how, actually at the moment it's mostly because this would go into the installer, and the installer is very carefully designed and usability and all of this, so where do you put it and how do you, so the first thing will be that you can do that when you first prepare your settings file, and then there will be a step for sure because Sun is very interested in that, and I hope that he will make it happen. And and you can help as well. The second one is the a robust synchronization, and the idea here is that this synchronization or this import part would handle possible conflicts. And this is also one of the reasons why I said before the working together on the same site is not really possible at the moment. Because when you import configuration, the configuration that you have on the site is overwritten, because that's what you want to do when you import the new configuration. But if you, for example, have views created independently, then they could clash. Or, for example, if you export your configuration and you version it in Git, then basically you leave it to Git to do the merging, and you leave it to Git to figure out what is sane to do with the Drupal configuration, which in my opinion is quite dangerous as such. But it most probably works in a lot of cases, and then in the cases where it doesn't, because it worked all of the times, you're not careful enough, and bam. Yeah. But there's an issue to work this out, and yeah, go and help with that. Then CMI for developers. Fago already covered some of these things this morning. All the things are object-oriented, and there's an interface for configuration entities. And their entities, as you can see, there's a nice base class for it. There's two. One is for the content entities and one the configuration entities, and I will not go more into details because Fago covered this morning. But it's rather easy to work with, because if you want to retrieve the configuration, you use this global static function from Drupal, and you pass it in the name of the configuration. This is the key. So this is the name of the file without the YAML extension. For example, the site would be Drupal config system site, and then to get the site name, you use the get method, and you pass in the name. And if you look at the YAML file, I didn't add it here now, but name is one of the keys in there. And the other way around is also quite easy. You do the same thing, and you use set, and then you save. And this acts directly on the active store, and it's immediately modified. And the staging is not used for that. So if you do that, it happens.
So there is no more variables? Or?
I will come to that. And no, variables are dead. But I will come to that in a minute. There are 2 slides. Of course, there is Drush integration. You will need Drush 7, which is under development at the moment. But it works quite nicely, at least what I tried. There are some Drush commands. There's more, but these are the CMI-specific ones that are most relevant. And you can do all the stuff that you can do with the UI, you can also do with Drush. So the importing, exporting, you can look at things and set things. But with great power comes great responsibility. Always make sure what you're doing is what you ought to be doing. And now comes the variable. So configuration, everything. And as you might have heard and maybe not mourned, the death of the variables. So instead of variable get and set, you use either configuration, where that makes sense, or the state API, where that makes sense. And the state API is the things that are very site and environment specific. For example, the classical example here is the time of the last cron run. You don't want to have that as a configuration, of course. But it still needs to be saved, and you still need to access it. And this is where the state API comes in. It's also a key value store, and it's quite easy to use. As it's almost the same as before. You just have state instead of config. What this brings, or what is very important to know here, is that there is a very clear configuration. What is configuration and what is state, and also what is content. And this is important because maybe you were using in Drupal 7, you were using some of the things that are considered content as configuration, and that won't work because it will work, but it will then depend on the content being there. So if you have views and you have taxonomy terms and so on, and you use the taxonomy terms as configuration rather than content, then the terms will not be exported. Same with menu items and so on. The features allowed you to export these things, or like menu items, for example, but they're content, so they will not be exported in this fashion, and you have to take care of them in a separate way. But that's what I said in the beginning. It's the separation, and if you follow it, you will live happily. If you try to do things in a different way, so maybe you will have to rethink some of the things when you encounter this. Another important piece of information for developers is that you can overwrite configuration in the settings file. There is a nice example of the settings.local.php, where you can, for example, set the CSS aggregation or JS aggregation or the tweak debugging settings, which are configuration, but you can overwrite on your system only and not interfere with the production values of these settings. And finally, if you have like a Git workflow, the first step, of course, is to move the configuration, the staging repository to somewhere where you can version it. Then you clone the website as in the first step with the pictures. You configure it, and you don't touch the configuration because that would be overwritten when you re-import the new one. And except instead of downloading and uploading, well, you can still download it and then add it to Git. But you can also do it with Drush, for example. You would commit the changes to your staging directory and then pull it on the live site and import the configuration on the live site. So I didn't make several steps because it's basically exactly the same that you can do with the UI, and you still have to make sure that you double check what you're doing because of the potential overwrites and so on. And lastly, if you know about Jam's virtual Drupal camp, where he interviews several people and they have their Drupal camp presentations on YouTube, basically. There's a very good one that is covering this topic from Rob Bayliss from Last Call Media. And well, you cannot see the URL very properly, but as I said before, you will get it later. Thanks for the attention. Yes, questions? No, no questions. Yes.
So are the terms configuration or content? For example, terms, taxonomy terms.
They're content.
They're content.
Yes.
And what would happen if I would export view that uses filter for some taxonomy term that I don't have in production? So first I have to transport the content, and then I can import it. Do you understand?
Yes, and this is one of the things that is also under discussion, the content staging, which would take care of this. So you could like take the content from upstream and do it the other way around as well. But I'm not 100% sure how the views taxonomy term works exactly because I haven't tried it myself. But yeah, this is something that needs to be figured out as well.
Like, when you are creating some websites after each other, you actually need like base configuration for the modules. Like, I will make the CT editor as default. I will set up the image uploader and stuff like this. I would mean this would be a configuration file, and I would like move between sites, and it had to be like movable, and you showed that it wasn't focused, or it wasn't solved that it can be movable between projects.
Yeah, so the question is if you want to have kind of an installation profile thing where you have the setting up of the image uploader and so on into configuration that you want to reuse. And yes, this is also possible. If you look at the modules that are there, they all have a configuration like the installation folder, which has this yeah, which for example this here, you see module systems config install is the default configuration for a module, and you can also have default configurations for other things, and they will be imported when the module is enabled. So when the site is set up, or when you later enable a module, then this would contain all this information that you want to have.
And these files are transferable?
Yes, because these you see here, they don't contain the UUID. The UUID gets added once the file is moved from this installation folder to the Active Directory or the Active Store.
Are these files considered core?
This is core, yes.
So how can I override it and store the file? Or provide an alternative for?
Yes, you can make your own installation profiles like before, and you can provide other this in files.
Would it be
I think.
possible to create just a module that contains a few configuration files, no code, and use it as a feature in Drupal 7?
Yes, Andrea blogged about this on nuvole.org half a year ago, when this was still under development, and called it the poor man's feature for Drupal 8. And yes, it's possible, but like I said before, it's the files are not atomic, so you cannot, for example, have permissions and then use those because all the permissions from all the modules are in the same user role file. So yeah, yes and no. For some things it will work, for other things it will not work, and you will need an intermediate step. And that's the place where Drupal 8 features will come in.
Is it because that we have now the configuration entity and the structure of that entity is well defined, so that it basically defines?
Yes, exactly. The file is the configuration, and the entity that uses this file, there's a direct link. So the configuration entity that you get with the code is basically the file rendered into an object, basically.
And in an enterprise level, where there are several developers and people working on the same project, actually, you had this little star that is currently not supported.
No, it will be. It's not at the moment.
Okay, but it will.
Yes, there's this other issue that I don't know if it's on. No, on this side of the slides. Yes, this is being worked on, and this should then in the end work if Drupal has this notion of being being able to distinguish what is new and what has changed in which way. And for example, features now has this different states where it can be overwritten or default or review, and I don't know if Drupal core is going to be doing that in the end, but they're trying to figure out how this can be made so that possible conflicts can be solved.
Can you add configuration for another config entity in a different module? Let's say you want to add a new setting for a field type.
I think so. Yes, you can add. For example, this poor man's feature would have views and have import these views, for example. But then again, the CMI is not trying to do this. The CMI is trying to allow you to stage the configuration and synchronize two environments. It's not designed for configuration in between sites. Like the features was not designed for doing this. This is not designed to be a feature. And this is where a lot of the headaches with features comes from.
I think more if you're building a feature as a module, basically, not exporting something that's configured to the interface, but building it from code. So then you would have to define some things that you need in order to function.
Yes, of course. And all these things, there's a dependency between the configuration objects. So for example, if you add a field, you want to make sure that the module that adds this field is enabled as well. So they go together a little bit. Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much.